So we're going to take a three-legged stool approach to this presentation, and we're going to cover three key areas of any content marketing operation. So I'll kick things off with strategy, Deb will cover editorial, and then Stan will hit distribution to close us off. So I'm going to hit strategy real quick, and talk about how we've been crossing this bridge from being a traditional marketer to being more of a media company over the last couple of years. And so this bridge is, it's been a painful bridge sometimes to cross because there's been lots of roadblocks and traffic, but we're making progress. So I'll share some of that with you guys. So I thought I'd start a quote from Mr. Joe Plitzi here. He wisely said, "Content is not the asset, it's the owned audience that you get from it that's the real lasting value." I think this is important because content marketers tend to think, content is the end, right? But it's actually not the end. The end is a meaningful audience, right? So if we can create and generate a lasting audience that's going to pay dividends for our brand down the road, that's really the win here. Because creating content's not the hard thing to do, right? Like we can create a lot of content, but can you actually harvest an audience from it? That's the question. So if you can, and those that do and can are called publishers. And that's really why we're taking more of an audience-centric approach to our strategy here. So this is our audience development strategy. It spans from how we pull audiences into our content, from the non-exposed to the first-time reader to the repeat reader to the subscriber. And it's important to note that this development strategy really is based 100% on the premise that audience development happens sequentially, not instantly, right? So a lot of marketers, I think, tend to think or want to believe that, hey, all you got to do is show them the pre-roll ad, show them the banner ad, and boom, you've converted them. But the reality is, right, that's not the way it works. To build actual lasting trust and loyalty, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of intelligence in terms of the data you can collect from your audiences. So this is really the backbone of everything we do. We ladder up all of our tools, our tech, our distribution, our KPIs. We ladder up to this model here, and it drives our whole strategy. So I'd encourage you guys, when you create a content strategy, to think about more of a progressive development strategy like this versus the traditional sales funnel that's not really built for long-term publishing success. So here's some of the key pivots we've made since launching IQ in 2012. We actually launched the site with curated content. About 50% of the content was curated, but we found that only 10% of our readers were reading the curated content. So we switched to original content and started to build out our newsroom. And when we did, we made the conscious effort to actually pull it in-house, because we believe that by investing in in-house journalists, you can really create more authentic, more rich stories, because your journalists, if they're inside the doors of your company, are much more connected to your brand and to your people. And then we started to move to retaining audiences instead of reaching audiences. So we really started to figure out, how do we not just drive a bunch of one-time traffic, but actually pull people back into the site, create those repeat readers, those email subscribers, et cetera. And as part of the way to do that, we discovered that we had to really figure out how to create serialized content. So we used to post about 60 posts a month, so a ton of content that wasn't necessarily connected to one another. So we decided to move more to a programming approach. So today we actually publish only about 30 stories a month, but they're more bigger impact series. So you'll see a lot of 4 or 5, 6-part series on IQ that are more collective, that give our audiences a way to naturally kind of stay engaged in that storyline. So those key topics that we're trying to drive, which Deb will hit on, there's a very natural way now for audiences to kind of get the why it matters, like what it is and how it works. So we're taking kind of more of a page out of Netflix per se versus just publishing a couple posts a month to chase that volume game. And then lastly, we've really moved our processes to be more about publishing operations. So we run editorial meetings. Deb runs a weekly editorial meeting. We have editorial IDs for our writers. We have a media kit for our stakeholders. We use Quantcast now for publishing analytics. So we're really kind of moving from just thinking like a publisher to actually building our business model out like a publisher. So what have we really learned? There's been obviously a lot of learnings over the last couple of years as we've been, trying to move away from traditional marketing into publishing and into being more of a media company. And these are kind of 5 key distinctions that we're trying to chase after between media companies and marketers, right? And this is kind of more of what this is the status quo of marketing versus an innovative media company. So number one, marketers get trapped in black holes to boost reach and eyeballs, and media companies find white space to influence unique audiences. So this is really important because with so much content out there today, you've got to figure out how to differentiate your content amongst all the noise, right? Because there's a lot of content that looks the same, feels the same, but the reality is if you can't break through that and you can't tell stories only your brand can tell, you're never really going to make an impact. Number two, marketers play it short with 12-week brand campaigns. Media companies play the long game with franchises and series. So this is a big one. Everybody can probably attest that have worked in marketing to being in that tight deadline around launch this website and here's the 6-week window you have to hit. But publishers take a completely different approach, right? They're actually playing the long game. They're trying to build a long-term audience. And we all love to cite Red Bull as the signature example of amazing content marketing and publishing, but we have to realize that they committed to being a media company 15 to 20 years ago, not 15 to 20 months ago, right? So it takes a lot of time to develop an audience. So you have to be patient, but of course, still prove results as you go. Number three, marketers outsource publishing to agencies and consultants, and media companies hire and cultivate in-house journalists. Again, this is a big belief that we have, is that if you're gonna build your content house, build it on the backs of your own people, right? This is not to say that you can't have agencies help with certain things like analytics or obviously media agencies of record, but when it comes to actually creating amazing content, I would encourage you guys to shake up that traditional agency model and actually build your content house on the backs of your own people. And again, think about New York Times or Wall Street Journal. The reason why their content's so compelling and their brand's so great is because they invest in their own people. They don't outsource their front page news and editorial. They have amazing people writing and creating content. Number four, marketers rent audiences and data on someone else's platform. Media companies own audiences and data on their own platform. So this, of course, is a big belief of Mr. Joe Polizzi and team at CMI of the rent-to-own model. But we have to remember that platforms are a place to harvest an audience, not build it. And we can look no further than what happened with Facebook over the last couple of years, where we can attest to this as a big brand. We invested a lot of money to build up our fan base to 25, 30 million, all to find out that actually that's more like 2,500 people if you don't want to pay to reach them. So the reality is that Facebook fans are great. There's a channel out there, but the reality is that Mark Zuckerberg is your landlord, and he will change your rental agreement when he wants, and you can't do much about it. So use that push-pull distribution model where you're pushing content to where people are discovering it, where they are, but then you can't stop there. You got to pull them back into your own sites and into your own infrastructure to then convert them into an email subscriber, harvest more data, get smarter about what kind of content they want to consume. So that's a big one. And then last but not least, marketers sell products with content. Media companies sell their content as a product that will later drive demand for other products. And Joe kind of talked about this on Tuesday, but this is an example here from, I have a 4-year-old son. Anybody who has probably toddler boys knows that they're probably obsessed with Cars, the Cars franchise. So we've got tons of Cars toothbrushes. We've got Cars pull-ups and books and a bunch of toys. So this picture on the right, if you look at it, you'd say, well, Disney is a product company, right? They've got all these products. But in reality, they're a media company first and foremost that creates just amazing content, killer content, that secondarily drives billions of dollars in merchandise sales. So I think as marketers, we got to think really big and think about how do you package and productize your content in a way that will naturally drive interest and demand for the actual products that you sell. And this is a hard one to sell to upper management. Of course, they want to see the sales, the shopping carts, all those conversions. But if we can, again, kind of play the long game here and think about our content as a product in itself first and foremost, it's going to later drive massive demand if we do it right. So I'll leave you with this, just a question of, when you're thinking about whether it's your process, your content strategy, your distribution strategy, whatever it is, are you really thinking like a media company? Because we've learned that traditional marketing, and this is kind of the premise of Joe's new book, Killing Marketing, is just not set up to be successful, right? If you really want to build long-term audiences and you want to have an owned audience that that you can leverage as an asset in itself, you've really got to think and act and build out your business model like a media company. So So I encourage you guys to get on that bridge. We can attest to it. There's lots of traffic, lots of roadblocks. It's going to take time to cross that bridge, but the end destination is going to be well worth it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb, and Deb can cover, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of how we operate in terms of the editorial that we produce and the approach we take to content. So
thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
So I'm Deb Landau, and I handle editorial for IQ. And wanted to talk to you, not tell you what to do or how to do it, because I don't know, but I can tell you what we know and what we've learned. And one of the things that we've learned is that content marketing is hard. It's hard to do it effectively, and it's even harder to figure out what effective means. So one of the things, I think there are three main challenges. First one is that it costs a lot. Creating content is expensive, especially like most big brands, you're using big agencies to tell your stories. Distributing content is expensive, especially, we all know that just because you build it doesn't mean people will come. So we've had to learn to get really, really smart and strategic about how we're going to get our content out there. And as Luke alluded to, the push-pull method. How do we get it out there, and then how do we get something from it? Traffic isn't enough. And then tracking and analyzing costs a lot. And we have learned that if we can get valuable information from our audience, we can do a lot to influence where they go and what they consume next. But you need to have the right tools and the right people to synthesize that data. Otherwise, you might as well throw your money away. And then one of the things for IQ is that we're a big brand, and so people think, oh, you've got deep pockets and all the money you can get your hands on. But actually, we're trying really, really hard to prove that you don't need to do that to succeed. Because we know that there's a whole ecosystem of people out there that don't have the deep pockets, and we don't either, because we're always, one of the things that we definitely have is this giant sea of stakeholders who are always sort of, what are you going to do with the content? What are you doing to add sales? How are you proving ROI? And, we're always in this sort of sing for our supper space. So we sort of decided a little while ago that, you know what, we're going to stop trying to prove ROI and think more like a publisher and think about audience cultivation. So we're more over circulation over agenda. And by doing that, it's kind of freed us up a little bit to not be spending all sorts of dollars on trying to prove or justify our existence or what we're trying to do. So, one of the things that we do, too, is talk to our stakeholders about expectations. We are in it for the long game. I talk about this all the time, that advertising and traditional marketing is kind of like a one-night stand. You're like, bam, that was great. But then, and if you want to have a long-term relationship, it takes time. You got to work at it. You got to have your ups and your downs, and you got to go through those. And so it takes commitment, and that's a very different approach for people to get their heads around. Third challenge is that really, really understanding the difference between, something's supposed to happen here, between content marketing and advertising, really understanding the difference. And advertising is valuable. Ads, sort of incite your audience to act, whereas content really invites them to engage. And it's a very different proposition. Sorry. So just talking about how we roll at IQ. So as Luke alluded to, we used to publish curated content, and we published a lot of it. It was all, posting, and it looked good, and it seemed like it was great, but nobody was reading it, like nobody, like not even people inside of Intel. So then we, decided we need to be choosing the right stories, not just a whole bunch of stories. And so we also, that was when we started to shift and think like a publisher. We started a better is better versus more is better approach. And we started hiring journalists who were seasoned writers who understood impartiality, who understood how to do an interview and craft a narrative. And by doing that, we sort of opened the door for becoming a lot more of an authentic voice in the media mix, as opposed to coming from a brand. We do not speak from the voice of Intel. We find as soon as you do that, people are gone. And so we really, really understand that to create content that matters to people, it has to be for them, not for us. And that's a different shift in mindset. So we we do what we do best. We publish long-form stories. They're about 700 to 1,000 words, filled with rich media whenever we can get our hands on it. And we now are down to publishing about 5 to 7 stories a week. We spend a whole lot more time editing and working with writers to get the right stories and getting the right interviews, getting the right voices in there, and making sure that before we go and spend a whole bunch of money promoting them, they're worth promoting. So we craft a good story. We ask for every little piece of content we do. Does this story matter, and what new are we bringing to the table? There's so much noise out there, and if we just add to the noise, we're just cluttering up the ecosystem. So what can we bring to the table? And that's where finding your niche is so important. And for us, you know, what we have at Intel is the access to the depth and breadth of some pretty big brains, some pretty smart people who are like working in the weeds of silicon photonics, or the guys geeking out on how to make performance issues better in virtual reality, or you know, people who are like really meaningfully digging into what it's going to take for people to trust autonomous driving, autonomous cars. So having access to those people is our niche. It's our, you know, ability to get those stories out in a way that's interesting and meaningful to people is what we have. And then we really realize that people want to read about people. So like most companies, a lot of our stakeholders are like, hey, I want people to know about my product or my initiative or my solution. And knowing the difference between a thing and a story is huge. So, you know, for example, I have a couple of examples. One is, there was, you know, this was a while ago. We were launching a new, you know, chip, a new board on a system on a chip, basically for people like makers and people making wearables and things like that. And so it was this chip is launching, it's so cool. And it's like, well, you know, it's just a thing. It's like, what do I have to say about this thing? And then I heard somebody talking about, there was a guy who worked at somewhere deep in the, you know, bowels of Intel who was taking this chip and making a rocket out of it by installing it into a styrofoam cooler. So he took the styrofoam cooler and took it out, just on his spare time, took it out to the gorge in Oregon and launched it into space so he could track it and see how high it got and what it got to or whatever. That thing blew up and it landed like 200 miles away from where he started. But like, that's a cool story. That's a good way to talk about that product.